Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Kaplan, and I am president of the board of directors of the 92nd Street Y. It is my pleasure to serve in that capacity, and even more so, to welcome you all to this very special event. It is my privilege to introduce our guests this evening. Matthew Bishop is American business editor and New York bureau chief of The Economist. He is, additionally, the co-author of the very important work, Philanthrocapitalism: How Giving Can Change the World. His guest this evening is Bill Gates, the chairman of Microsoft and the co-chair and trustee of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Truly, he needs no introduction, so instead I would like to welcome him with a compliment. In the Jewish prayer service that is recited each morning, we say, "Bring us in peace from the four corners of the earth." Mr. Gates, as a visionary, you have truly brought together the four corners of the earth. Anyone who has ever turned on a computer or indeed a television set would know that. Yet through your family's extraordinary philanthropy, you've made it more peaceful in so many ways. And to refer to just one of your projects, finding a vaccine for malaria, a disease which kills one child every 30 seconds, you're making it a more hopeful place too. There are no greater achievements than these. It is a very, very special honor to have you on our stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Matthew Bishop and Bill Gates.
Extremely well spent. So what do you regard as the best value for money investment that there's been on global health so far?
Well, there's nothing that beats vaccines. You know, these are miracle interventions where in the 1980s, the world got serious about getting 7 basic vaccines out to lots of children, and coverage went from less than 30% to over 70%. That includes a measles vaccine, a whooping cough vaccine, tetanus, and that saved millions of lives. Now the big challenge for us is twofold. It's to drive that coverage rate up to the 90% level. Well, ideally 100%, but it's realistic to get it to a bit over 90%. And second of all, to take the new vaccines that kids in this country are getting just routinely that are a bit expensive still, one for diarrhea called rotavirus, one for respiratory disease called pneumococcus. Those two vaccines, between them, would save almost 1 million lives a year. And yet, they're not out in the developing world yet. Over the next 5 years, we ought to be able to achieve that. The typical delay for a new vaccine has been about 25 years between when it's in the rich world and when it's in the poor world. Ironically, the diseases that we're talking about, take the diarrhea from rotavirus, in the rich world, people don't die from it. They just get an episode that, worst case, they actually have to go to the doctor or even to the hospital. In India and Africa, because those services aren't available, it kills hundreds of thousands of children. So if you had to pick one thing that's just mind-blowing, it's funding the research on those new vaccines, getting them into the package, and then getting the distribution up to extremely high levels. The most expensive one, the one that you would be easiest to criticize, is AIDS treatment, because compared to vaccinations and some other interventions, the cost per life saved on putting somebody on AIDS drugs over time is, somewhere above $5,000 per life saved. Now, here in the US, we spend millions of dollars to save a life. So if you think that all lives are created equal, there's somehow a factor of 200 problem because we're not saving lives in parts of the world for that. But if you knew that you couldn't get any more money, if you thought, okay, this is it, then actually some of that spending should be on the childhood conditions and not on those AIDS drugs. But in fact, both of those things ought to be funded. And so it's only when you get into the zero-sum thing that you start to say, okay, should that most expensive intervention, which the Global Fund has done an incredible job on, and in the US it's the PEPFAR program, that you can say, okay, is that exactly how those dollars should be spent?
And are you disappointed by the progress of the attempt to get an AIDS vaccine?
Yeah, this morning I was out in Brooklyn at a laboratory that the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative, run by Seth Berkley, has put together. The city was generous in helping to fund that. And some of the top AIDS researchers were there, and we talked about the state of the field. There's been a few very positive developments in the last year, but this will probably be the most difficult vaccine the world's ever created. It's not likely we'll have an AIDS vaccine in the next 10 years. I think, optimistically, I think there's a very good chance we'd have one within the next 20 years. There was a trial in Thailand where it looked like there was some effect, a pretty modest effect, but that really guides us in terms of what we need to do. And there's the so-called antibodies that have been discovered. Actually, IAVI was the key on that. And that really also points us in the right direction. So I'd say versus a year ago, we're a lot more hopeful about that. Now, in the meantime, we think we can get a drug that you can take to protect you from getting AIDS, where you would take a pill a day. It's called prophylaxis. And there are some trials that will report out in about a year from now that'll tell us whether that really works as well as we think it will. So what we do is we get that intervention out in a big way until the vaccine comes, and then that becomes sort of the ultimate solution. We will see generosity continue to go up. The last few years have been tough, particularly because of these endowment drops. And you have an expectation that you're going to be able to keep your giving levels up. In our case, we had to go to a higher percentage, a bit over 7% on the payout in order to not go backwards on the funding that we provided. So, fortunately this year's been a better year, and that won't be as difficult.
Do you see it as part of your role to try and persuade other wealthy people to become philanthropists?
Not really. I mean, they should take 100% of the credit for anything they do. I'm glad to share the fact that I'm enjoying it so much, and that there's an opportunity to have impact, and that you can do it with your wife, do it with your family. Anybody who's interested, I want to share. But actually saying that other people should, I don't think that's a constructive role.
The last question, as unfortunately our time is pretty much up. As you look at the next 5 years and the work that you're doing in philanthropy, where do you think you're going to make the most progress in really building a better world?
Well, I think the global health work is the one where some very exciting things will happen in the next 5 years. That's not to downplay the education or agriculture kinds of things we're doing, but we're earlier in the education piece, and I think it's a tougher one. If 5 years from now we have a sort of teacher measurement system that teachers like, that would be huge and might lead to some big things. The online education, we ought within 5 years to have some really cool courses that anybody can go up and find and get excited about. But it's in the global health where we have more than a decade of building up energy, and also the US government and other people coming in. That's where people should have the highest expectation that dramatic improvement takes place.
So what does dramatic improvement mean? What will you regard as success in that sense?
Childhood deaths coming down from 9 million to say 7.5 million, which over, per year, that's a pretty good decrease. Dramatic improvement in malaria, getting the rotavirus and pneumococcus vaccines out in broad distribution, that's achievable within this time frame. Inventing a couple of new vaccines out of, say, the 8 we're working on, having 2 of those have a breakthrough, probably not AIDS, but some of the others. So at many levels. And, I think there's some great things going on in India right now where it will go from being fairly backwards in terms of some of the key measures, the vaccination rates, the measles levels, that they'll actually, over the next 5 years, actually become quite a strong model. I'd also hope in that time frame we've got a polio elimination, which, that alone will be worth pausing for a few minutes to celebrate.
So you sound like you're pretty optimistic.
I am pretty optimistic, yep. That's why I keep signing the checks.
Well, on that note, I'd like to thank you very much for sharing with us.